Hello, everybody. Welcome back to conversations with the participants in the roundtable discussions. Today, I'm talking to Rachael Brown, who is from Glasgow and is the CEO of the Future Economy Company, which is based there, and which is, as I understand it, Rachael, been running for about 4 years. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, and what do you do?
So we would describe ourselves as a social enterprise that is focused on creative and social impacts that really relate to the creative economy and the creative industries. We are all about powering up creative individuals, creative entrepreneurs, creative businesses to make a significant difference in Glasgow and beyond.
And your roots, so as an organisation, are in an earlier organisation, aren't they? Which you came into and then changed significantly, which was the Creative Enterprise Office. What drove the change in your head? What's the step that the leap that you've made in terms of the work that you do?
It's a great question. It's a great question because sometimes when you're in the creative economy or the creative space, big change is really challenging. Little changes happen every day, but actually big changes are really challenging. And I had inherited an organisation that had been going for probably about 12 years. And it was doing great things around supporting creative individuals in their business endeavour. However, it hadn't evolved fast enough to the world around it. And that was a really big eye-opener for me, because being a creative organisation, it wasn't very creative. And it hadn't really moved with the times in terms of structure, in terms of operational governance, all the kind of backroom stuff that sometimes can be felt as not that important, but actually is really fundamental when you're trying to be at the ahead of the curve. And very often the creative entrepreneurs and the creative businesses we were working with were really on the cusp of something interesting, things that had never been explored before or delivered before. And so I felt quite strongly that we needed the operational excellence behind us to be able to serve them better. So the change really was an evolution. It went from, Culture Enterprise Office was really much more project-based, and it was much more focused on perhaps maybe an extension of a government department type. It kind of provided its services day in, day out, and it was really good at that. The impact was great. But in an ever-changing world, we needed to be more like the industry that we represented. So we needed to be more flight of foot. We needed to have stronger foundations in terms of operational excellence and governance and deliverability. But we needed also to be able to take risks. And sometimes that doesn't sit well with a fully publicly funded organisation. Risk profile can be considered different, but we felt very strongly, and I felt very strongly, that having an entrepreneurial mindset in this space in order to better serve the creative economy as a whole was really vital, because we're dealing with the unknown. Now, this is pre-pandemic. So so I didn't get a lot of traction. I'm not going to have to be honest. A lot of people thought, really, that seems quite a big leap pre-pandemic. However, as we started to see the world changing and people were working in different ways, people were living in different ways, people had to engage with business differently. We became very important to the Scottish landscape, and actually Glasgow as a city became very important in the pandemic for that reason too.
Can I ask you about your background as well, though, in terms of the creative sector? What brought you into this dialogue about the creative economy?
So I've got quite an interesting journey. I'm perhaps one of these people who's thanks to creativity, gloriously unemployable. I started life as an opera singer. Why would you not? And I used to teach opera in prisons, of course. Why would you not? And it was that experience actually got me really hooked and really passionate around the creative economy, around policy, around change, around impact, around the potential that people have. I had a very stark leadership lesson when I was teaching opera in prisons, because nobody asked me to be there. Nobody wanted the activity, but actually the activity had a real fundamental impact on people's behaviour. And we could see how people could flourish given the right kind of tools, the right kind of engagement, and the right kind of activity. And that wasn't that wasn't just about the fact that everybody was singing and everybody was doing the cultural activity. It's actually about the creativity. It was about the mindset. It was about the entrepreneurial piece. It was about the innovation that came from it. And so that really had a big influence on me. And I left there and started a number of different creative organisations and opportunities that were really exploring the impact of creativity and how we can create businesses and how we can create organisations that make fundamental change. I spent the last 20 years supporting creative and social businesses to be more commercial. And I do a lot of work with very big commercial organisations and businesses, helping them become more creative and more social. So as things kind of have moved on, that part around, the entrepreneurial mindset, the creative and critical thinking that you can have when you've got those creative parameters, and also being able to put innovation in place. It's exciting because it feels now that everything in that kind of roller coaster journey of my career, everything now is coming to the right place. And the work we do at the Future Economy Company is bringing a lot of those strands together to demonstrate what our economy could look like if we really understood the value of the creative economy.
Can I bring you back to the question of Glasgow? Because that's part and parcel of what we want to be able to talk about in the round table. You're, I gather, not a native Glaswegian, you're from Edinburgh. So I know there's a huge rivalry between the two cities, a long-standing one. But just looking at Glasgow's kind of history in terms of this notion of it being a creative city, back in 1990, it was the first UK city to become the European Capital of Culture in that programme. How important, obviously that predates a conversation about the creative economy in the way in which we understand it today, but how important do you think that was as far as Glasgow's journey towards becoming this, I recognise this being this creative centre?
It was, it was hugely important, and it was hugely important for two main reasons. Firstly, the leadership of the city, the people that the sort of the city council leadership, but also leaders within the city, within that structure, the structural leadership of the city really valued it. They got it. They understood it. So there was structural and political will, and it was very well executed, and people really kind of grasped the potential of it. The second part, I think, is the part that changed it, and the part that made it more impactful, and the part that's the most important part, was if you go to Glasgow today and you ask anybody in the streets if they remember 1990 and the festival, they will all have a story. No matter how old, no matter how small, no matter what area you come from, everybody has a story. And they'll say, oh, my mum was there, my gran was there, my dad was there, I'd heard all about it. And it actually created a dialogue that perhaps in a lot of ways had never happened for many years in a city like Glasgow, where people in the community really valued something and the political structures really valued something, and everybody came together to have the same conversation. That made it incredibly easy, albeit very difficult still, but it made it easier to bring other things to the city and for the city to engage in its value. The very quickly people understood the power of the pride in the event. So Glaswegians had huge pride in being the first to do it, but also it was brilliant. It was so fondly looked after that people just would go. People went 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, and that was the local community. These events, having been brought up in Edinburgh and have spent 20 odd years in Edinburgh and 20 odd years in Glasgow, that kind of foot in two camps. Sometimes Edinburgh Festival is not as the capital city of Scotland. It's not always for local people. It's not as engaging. There's a huge amount of visitors come, and that's great. And it's great for the economy. Everybody loves it. The difference in Glasgow, it was all about the people of Glasgow. It was all about the communities that engaged with it. And that gave it a real solid foundation to build on and to engage on. Very, very different approaches, equally distinct. But I think the biggest power that came from the event in Glasgow really enabled other types of work to continue and other types of events to be bolted on alongside, knowing fine that the community were really behind it. Glasgow's a second city, and it's a population of 600,000. So it's not a huge city by any stretch of the imagination. But it has a really, really strong thread in it around community engagement. And I think the 1990 cemented that and enabled the city leaders to build on it, which was vital.
And obviously, though, it was a starting point for collecting data as well about the impact in that way. I assume, I mean, because it predates the creative economy, that must have been largely around tourism and visitor numbers and things of that sort.
It was, and actually that's hugely powerful because nobody had really done that before. People had assumed if you come to the city, you might be going to, watch a football match, or you might be going shopping, some really traditional stuff. But actually, people hadn't put the connection together that the restaurants were full because people had had a great day out at the garden festival. They hadn't made those connections. So the city did a really powerful and very important thing where they started to measure how many people were travelling into Glasgow, what they were accessing, why they were accessing it, and visitor numbers for restaurants, visitor numbers for hotel rooms, visitor numbers in terms of where people were going around the city. And that started to build up a picture of what was possible and what people were doing. And I think what was really interesting, it kind of, from the back of that, gave a flurry of small festivals and touch points, and realizing that people were engaging in cultural tourism. People were coming for music, they were coming for theatre, they were coming for concerts, they were coming for the architecture. Glasgow's a famous city. The interesting story between Edinburgh and Glasgow is Edinburgh is often described as the Athens of the North. You come out the train station and it's wow. You can't help but miss it. You've got the castle, you've got a huge, huge vista. It's amazing. Glasgow's a city where you have to look up. The architecture is above you, and you have to wander around the city and look up. And nobody had really started to capture that data. And when they did, then we realised actually it's the architecture, it's that point, that kind of part of Glasgow that has such an influence and has such beautiful architecture in it. We could start to do something else with it. We could start to engage in different ways.
And of course, 9 years later, you became the UK, Glasgow became the UK City of Architecture and Design. Now, to my mind, and from my experience in terms of the creative economy, that really felt to me as being the moment at which, particularly with the creation of the Lighthouse and the leadership there of Stuart MacDonald, was the moment when, in actual fact, the city really seemed to embrace the idea of the creative industries and the creative economy. Do you think, is that fair?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I think one of the things that Glasgow has is a real strength. Interestingly enough, I work a lot in the fashion industry, and one of a very big brand based in London said that actually, if they're going to test anything in a part of the UK, they'll test it in Glasgow, because actually you can test it, you can try something, and if you fail, it doesn't matter. People will still embrace and still give feedback, and it's a kind of loop. So we started, having the Architecture and Design Festival there was hugely important, because that kind of exploration piece started to become really fairly normal. And how very un-Scottish of me to talk about failure and embrace that failure, because actually that's not something we are known for as a country or a culture. But Glasgow has that. Glasgow has that, and that really was about strength of leadership, I have to say, in and amongst architecture and design, sadly missing now, and that strength of leadership we've had in the city was massively important. So you've got leadership in the creative and cultural economy space. You've got the test bed where people can be creative and fail and try again and fail and try again. And then you have the structural and the political will that says, yeah, let's make it happen. And the community are involved. It's a perfect mix in a lot of ways. That requires energy, it requires staying power, and it requires a lot of joined up thinking. And I think what the city did really well, which doesn't happen often in other cities in my experience, was they brought all of those people around the table to continue those conversations. So the city leadership didn't have a conversation over here, and the creative leadership didn't have a conversation over here. We all had those conversations together. And that meant that more progress could happen. But you need a win. You always need a win to help people to move that forward. And I think the festival, coupled with design and architecture 9 years later, and the Lighthouse, it was just a perfect moment.
Yeah, and you move on another 9 years, and all of a sudden, Glasgow joins the UNESCO Creative Cities Network,
Yeah.
but as a city of music. How has that changed things, and why city of music?
That's a good question. I mean, I think Glasgow's always had a history of I mean, we've got really brilliant popular music venues like the Barras and King Tut's, which have always been, the kind of like outside Manchester and Liverpool, you would cite Glasgow as as a key city for music and new bands, and the art school's integral to that. The Royal Conservatoire has been integral to that. We've got brilliant things. I think it's the mixture of music that Glasgow's had that was amazing. We've got Celtic Connections, which is a traditional music festival, but actually, I mean, what does that even mean? Traditional music from across the world. It's incredible stuff that come and visit us there. We've got brilliant world-class orchestras, all based, our main orchestras are based in Glasgow. We've got all the kind of bubbling new club scene, which back in the day was maybe considered a little risky, but actually some of the best DJs in the world have come out of Glasgow. Some of the best club nights have come out of the world of Glasgow. And we've learned really quickly in Glasgow that the nighttime economy was pretty lucrative and managed well and supported well, could have a great impact on the city. And music does that. You can wander around and get a really great vibe in Glasgow. So I think it's the fact that there was so much different types of variety, but equally it was really well supported and coordinated amongst itself. So there wasn't a kind of rivalry against, if you're into classical music, you can't go clubbing. Well, you can, and you can be that, you can be that person. And Glasgow's a kind of, an open city. Was a very, very diverse, a proud history of being a diverse city, open and welcoming to lots of different people. So there's lots of scenes that happen that, again, I think really came from the fact that it was a joined up approach, and that the city leaders acknowledged that needed support, and that in turn didn't quash anything. It just made it flourish. And that's a very difficult balance to strike within the creative space. But that, I think a huge part of that was because people could see the real value. We were still monitoring hotel beds, we were still monitoring restaurant reservations. You could see the direct correlation between brilliant big music concerts, small music concerts, and people coming to the city. And it just started, if you've never been to Glasgow, I would encourage it. It's got an incredible vibe about it.
Rachael, thank you so much. We'll have to end it there, I'm afraid, but we'll look forward to the conversation next Thursday. So thank you again very much for taking part in this.